Hart family here, and we are in historic and beautiful downtown Savannah, Georgia. We're about to head out for the Oliver Bentley's dog walk tour. It's a historic tour. Off we go.
And hurry up.
And hurry up. Maestro, are you excited for your dog tour? Yeah. Yeah. Here comes our tour guide.
I know you wanna do that, Abby. Don't do that.
How old is Abby?
She's 6. Yeah.
Pretty.
Of the colony of Georgia. Before the Brits arrived, there were Native Americans here, so we'll talk a little bit about that and how they got along. There was a Revolutionary War battle fought in Savannah. All right, so Tomachichi gives them a land grant, and all of a sudden the settlement is the land is cleared and the settlement's established. Right there.
I'm gonna take a guess. Is it something with a horse or no?
Yes, pre-automobile.
Okay.
Picture the streets being mud and manure because of horses. It's a boot scraper. And the manure
cool.
must have been pretty deep because see how it's curved here?
Yeah.
That's to scrape the top of your boot. So you got to scrape the top, and then it's beveled, then the bottom. So you go top, bottom, and the lady of the house might let you in.
So is this rail, like, I mean, it's
yeah.
probably original?
Yeah, it's original. Yep.
Wow.
First Georgia-born male to attend, and then graduate from West Point. Came back to his hometown, Savannah. Now he passed away in 1842. So during his lifetime, he was alive during that heyday of the cotton economy in the port of Savannah. It's 1842. What happened to Tomachichi, who was buried in 1739? Well, from 1739 until about the Revolutionary War, his earthen mound and stone pyramid were there. Somewhere around the Revolutionary War, gallows popped up in the square. They were in various places, and they eventually wound up in the middle of the square. Paul, she wants this monument put somewhere else. The city and the board of directors said they had too much into this. They're just going to continue. So they tidied up Tomachichi. They put him right back where Oglethorpe had put him, where they found him, and they built a monument on top. See the first terrace up with a little bit of grass and whatnot?
Yeah.
Can you see a little bit of brick pointing out underneath the granite? There's a brick tomb there that they re-entombed Tomachichi. So he's right where Oglethorpe put him, but sort of cleaned up. So Tomachichi's grave is now William Washington Gordon's monument. Percival Square is now named Wright Square. On that piece of dirt there, that lot, there was always a government building, Oglethorpe's original cabin for doing business. Now it's a courthouse. There's always been a courthouse there. CVS in that corner was the site of the original stockade and jail. And from this corner down to the second stop sign was the original settlement cemetery. So,
pretty convenient.
You were jailed, tried, hung, and buried all within 100 yards. Until 1752, and that Colonial cemetery was opened up and the original settlement cemetery was closed. The ghost tours will tell you that this is the most haunted square in town because of the cemetery being there and not quite sure if all the remains were actually removed, and also because of all the thousands of people that were hung in this square. I don't believe in ghosts, but their evidence for it being haunted is kind of interesting. See a little bit of Spanish moss right there? And then look in the canopy toward the courthouse, and then look left into this canopy over here, and then look over into that canopy on that corner. There's no Spanish moss in this square. That's a fact. There's Spanish moss all over town, and this square doesn't have any. So, if you believe the ghost tours, it's because all those people are still here, and Spanish moss isn't clinging to the trees. But I like the old Southern wise tale that says, Spanish moss can't grow where innocent blood was spilt. So you know the connotation of that, right? Some of these people that were tried weren't actually guilty. They were innocent. So Spanish moss can't grow where innocent blood was spilled. When the lady and the tramp are sucking on the spaghetti and then they kiss.
Right, well, right inside of there?
Yeah. It's her birth house. Where she founded the Girl Scouts is in her adult house, which I'll show you on the other side of town. But in 1953, the Girl Scouts of America acquired this house. So now, there's a gift shop here on the first floor. You can see the books in the window, Julia Gordon Low. That is the first floor. Even though this is ground floor, it's called garden level. See where the original roof line was? See that big piece of molding up there?
Yeah.
That's the original roof line for the Federal style. When the Gordon family bought it, they put a third story on it, and they liked the Victorian style of architecture. So they popped that third floor up there, and look at how much more ornate and fancy with all the little moldings.
Yeah.
That's Victorian.
Huh.
I've had architects on the tour that break into hives. You know, I mean, you don't put a Ford engine inside a Chevy.
Yeah.
You know, you don't put Victorian on top of Federal.
Yeah, definitely doesn't look right.
So why is that interesting? Because in Georgia, we have a granite quarry called Stone Mountain. Most of the granite, most of the Federal buildings in Washington, D.C., they went back to Massachusetts to get replacement. So somebody in Massachusetts got paid twice.
Jeez.
But when they rebuilt it, they still had the same problem. For the highest point in low land, we're going to get struck by lightning again. What do we do? Well, their workaround was to change the materials that steeple was built out of. It's not as much of an aha moment now because it needs to be repainted, it's a little tarnished. But it was originally wood and timber, which caught fire. Built it with steel, metal, and copper. You can tell the copper's turning green right now. They need to repaint it. But there's an unintended consequence of changing materials, especially heavier materials. Look at the last step to ground. And then take your eye all the way out to the right, and then back to the middle. See how that last step is about 4 or 5 inches shorter?
Oh yeah.
But over there it's about right? Because with all that different, with the heavier materials up there now, the church has sagged.
Wow.
It sank a little in the middle. Now the pillars aren't buckling. It's been like this for 100 years. But you can tell who attends this church and who's visiting. Because the visitors, when they come down the steps, they always stiff like that last step because it's half the distance.
This is in the opening of Forrest Gump with the feather scene. Bench scene from Forrest Gump.
Yeah, you can just step on it. Yep. There you go.
These are in every square?
Yep.
I don't think I've ever even noticed them. Oh, okay.
Founder of the colony of Georgia. And most people, I think, walk by and say, oh, look, a guy with a sword. There's some real subtle things about this statue which are brilliant. First, orientation. He's facing south. Actually, he's facing south because he's the new first line of defense to the royal colonies to the north, and the king is relying on him to self-defend against Spain if they march north. Because he has to self-defend, he's in full battle regalia for a general in the 1730s. He has his long battle coat on, see the shoulder armaments. His sword is unsheathed, but it's not up and out in a charged battle-ready position. It's down behind his right heel. He's not white knuckling it, it's sort of in his fingertips. So he's ready to use it. It's out and he's wearing, and he's armed for battle, wearing his battle coat. But there's a couple subtle things about this. First, the battle coat, the sculptor has it blown open a little bit in the wind. You can tell he's wearing a formal top coat underneath. This is like James Bond coming out of the ocean in a wetsuit, unzipping it and having a tuxedo on underneath. Yes, he's ready for battle, but it's not going to be a long battle because he's dressed for a parliamentary session or to have tea with the king. He has a formal top coat on underneath. Yes, his sword is unsheathed, but he's not white knuckling it. Yes, he's looking south, but he's not staring south. He's actually attending to some business over here to the side. The last little bit of symbolism, which is brilliant, is the palm tree prong behind him. The palm tree prong represents Florida, the fauna for Florida, St. Augustine, and specifically Spain. The sculptor is saying Oglethorpe is emoting, is Spain. I know you're out there. I'm on guard, but I'm not stressed about it. And oh, by the way, don't even bother coming up here because I've already cut you down. I've already put you behind me. The palm tree prong is resting on the stump of the palm tree that he cut down. All the little subtleties of this.
A lot of thought went into that.
Yeah, all the little subtleties in this impressed the committee. We're looking for a sculptor and an architect to do the Lincoln Memorial in DC. So Daniel French and Henry Bacon, the architect and the sculptor of this, they got the Lincoln Memorial gig, largely based on their thoughtfulness for this little guy here. Coat of arms of the city of Savannah. Second is the coat of arms for the state of Georgia. Third is Oglethorpe's family crest and coat of arms. And lastly and fourth is actually King George's royal family crest and coat of arms. Those are the 4 lions. After he and 2 of the co-conspirators were killed, the feds backtracked his footsteps and came to Savannah. And they interviewed the woman who ran the boarding house where he was staying, and they actually arrested her. She was put on trial, and she was found guilty as a co-conspirator to the Lincoln assassination, because even back then there was see something, say something, I suspect. So the reason Tomochichi was allowed to be in Percival Square was because 3 of those corners were occupied. There was a cemetery, there was a jail, and there was a government cabin like a courthouse. There weren't 40 families on Percival Square.
Okay.
The other 5 squares had 40 families on it, so the squares were common grazing ground. If you take a piece of metal and you put a gargoyle, sort of fish representation, an aquatic being on there, you just created a river. Although a dried riverbed, when it rains, only God can walk on water. Spirits can't. So no bad spirits can cross the water line and go in the house and harm the family.
And we just thought they were for decoration.
You know that this family, whose house had these stables, was one of the wealthiest families in Savannah. Now, how do we know that? We know they were very, very wealthy because they had leisure horses. Not horses that had a purpose to pull a wagon, just play horses. How do we know they have play horses? Because they stuccoed the outside of their stables to represent their favorite breed of leisure horse, Arabians. That's why it looks like an Arabian tent. This is like painting a Ferrari logo on your garage, right? Ford dealership in the state of Georgia. So, Model T's in the window here.
That's pretty
Thought
cool.
a Model T can fit through that doorway.
Jeez.
If you look inside here, this bar opened up a couple years ago when they tore down all the drywall and exposed. See the original brick? See that archway there? That's
Wow.
one stable door, and then the window left and right. Yeah, they exposed all the great original stable brick.
Say thank you, Maestro. Thank you.
Gentle?
Cool. No, no.
No, the command is gentle.
Oh, you won't take it? We'll take one for the road.
Sergeants don't necessarily get the nicest monuments in the city, but this is probably the nicest one in town. He did 3 things during his life that made him famous. The last one happened right here, so he gets the nicest monument in town. He was a soldier in Washington's army on our side for the Revolutionary War. The way battles were fought back then were, we all know, it's pretty amazing. Men line up in a line with guns pointed at men lined up in a line on the other side of the field, and they shoot at each other in that straight line. Now, if we're in this line, how do we know whether to advance or retreat or how to stay in formation? Well, we're listening for the regimental drum, but muskets are loud and battles are pretty chaotic. So what we're really doing is we're watching the regimental flag. Flag signals will tell you what to do. In a battle outside of Charleston, called the Battle of Moultrie, we were losing. The British were probably going to take the day. The story is the regimental flag bearer was shot and the regimental flag fell to the ground. And even though we were losing, Jasper apparently dropped his gun, picked up the regimental flag, and signaled for charge and started running across the field. And lo and behold, the rest of the troops followed him, leaving all the commanding officers behind the line saying, we didn't say charge. Luckily, they won the battle. There was a British prisoner of war stockade that was holding about 12 of his fellow soldiers prisoner. In the middle of the night, he and one other soldier, just the 2 of them, pulled sort of a SEAL Team 6 maneuver and raided that British stockade and freed all 12 of their fellow soldiers. Everyone got out alive. His legend's even bigger now. He's fearless, he can't be killed. Third thing, in December of 1778, Washington's army had Savannah, a few hundred troops, 400 or 500 or so. British show up with multiple of that, 2,000. British take Savannah in December of 1778. Wasn't much of a battle. About 500 plus soldiers and citizens lost their life in the taking of Savannah. So in September of the next year, Washington decides he wants the port of Savannah back. They don't have the numbers to fight 1-to-1, so they decide to lay siege to Savannah. Sieges are simple. You surround whatever you're laying siege to, and you don't let any supplies go in and out. You wait for them to starve and basically be less than full capacity. So the siege starts in the beginning of September. Savannah is a port city, so the only way to really lay siege to Savannah is to block the river. A French warship was out the mouth of the river blocking any British ships from coming in and resupplying, and then we had the ground surrounded. That cement marker right there denotes the southernmost line of defense for the British troops. Meaning in 1779, none of this was here. It was all just grassland and trees. There was a trench dug here, went all the way out to MLK, and back there were the British. On this side, roughly where that US food truck is, that was the original I-95. It was called Colonial Highway. It ran north and south from Brunswick, Georgia, up to Augusta, Georgia. So it ran at a bit of an angle through here. So that's I-95, Colonial Highway. We're over there. The Brits are back here. French warships in the river. The date says October 9th, 1779. Good sieges take longer than 5 weeks. That should say November 9th. Heck, it could even say December 9th. Why does it say October 9th? Well, the story is the French naval commander gave word to the ground commanders that it looks like the Brits are more heavily supplied than he originally thought, and it's hurricane season, and I'm taking my ship and men out of here back to the French West Indies. The ground commanders are livid. If the ship leaves, then Savannah can be resupplied. Can't have a siege if they can get supplies. So the ground commander's hand was forced because the French warship was going to leave. So on October 9, 1779, the shooting begins. Guess what falls to the ground? The regimental flag. Guess who drops his gun, his hat, and everything to rescue the regimental flag? William Jasper. Guess who was shot on the right-hand side, right below the rib cage, and died here during the siege of Savannah, October 9, 1779. William Jasper. His fellow soldiers on the left lamenting his loss. See the symbolism of the drummer and the regimental flag bearer in the middle, and see on the right the commanding officers, and then there he is on the ground on the right being given comfort by a doctor. Little thing that nobody notices about this, see where the regimental flag goes in and goes out? See that little face next to the tree?
Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't see that the first time, did you?
No.
No. You know what? That's not just a symbolic face for the Haitian boys that the French brought here to help support the battle. That person is actually named Henri, or being French, Henri, H-E-N-R-I, Henri Christophe. Who the heck is Henri Christophe? Henri Christophe was a 12-year-old boy who was here during the siege of Savannah, but when he grew up and became a man, he was the king of Haiti.
Oh.
Wow.
So he kept a diary, and on his death, the diaries noted that when he was a young man, at 12 years old, he was here in Savannah during the siege of Savannah, supporting the troops. He was taken back with the French ship.
Guys, out of
Later
that.
on, when he became an adult, when Haiti revolted against France, he became the king. This square was here, and all these buildings that we're looking at were here. So let's pretend it's December 21st, 1864. The Union Army has made it to the outskirts of Savannah. In the days and weeks leading up to the Union Army arriving, it wasn't much of a secret where they were going, so anyone who could get out of town did get out of town. All that was really left in the city were a couple of the city fathers, elderly, children, and female caregivers, those who couldn't travel. He came to Savannah in 1833 from Great Britain. By 1864, he was one of the wealthiest men in town. He made his money the way all the city residents of Savannah made their fortune. And that wasn't owning land or running a plantation. That was being either a banker, broker, warehouse owner, or ship owner for all the agriculture that came into Savannah. Hi, you hiding? General Sherman as his private residence during his stay with us.
Wow.
Knowing that if Sherman did burn Savannah, Sherman isn't going to be sleeping in a tent with his foot soldiers now that he's in a city. He's probably not going to burn the house he's staying in. So Greene was smart. He wasn't taken captive, he wasn't shot, didn't even know if anyone was listening to him, so he rode back in and waited. Union Army marched into town. The foot soldiers set up encampments in Forsyth Park, a few blocks that way, Colonial Cemetery, a few blocks that way, and down at the river, a number of blocks that way. Well, Sherman came to the realization that crazy Greene guy was right. That is the nicest house in town, and it's centrally located. It's perfect. So he hitches his horse to the fence there. He walks down the walk, comes up the steps, and knocks on the door. The other part of this story is probably urban wise tale, maybe even made up, but it sounds good. The story is Sherman knocked on the door, and a servant opened the door who had never seen a Union officer, let alone a Union soldier before. Opens the door. screams and slams the door in Sherman's face. Apparently Sherman kept his cool. He knocked on the door a second time. This time Greene answered the door himself. And it was all very formal back then. General Sherman, I presume. Mr. Greene, I presume. Pleasure to make your acquaintance. Pleasure to make your acquaintance. Mr. Greene will be taking you up on your kind offer of residency. Come on in, boys. That's where Sherman stayed during his months he was here in Savannah, and that is where, in the dining room on December 22nd, he wrote the dispatch giving Savannah to Lincoln as a Christmas present. We just walked 100 years from this original settlement, Percival Square, 1730, to this street being laid out in the early 1800s. A street in Savannah. Plenty of room to park left, plenty of room to park right, plenty of room to go up and down the street without having to give way, two-way. So why was this street given special dispensation? The story of Jones Street actually goes back to the cotton gin. Eli Whitney was from Massachusetts. He went to Yale. He was friends with Nathaniel Greene, Georgia residents that were more loyal to the king than they were to the Continental Congress, and they just left and went back to Britain. So a plantation outside of Savannah was abandoned called Mulberry Plantation, and Nathaniel Greene took occupancy of it, and he and his family came down to run Mulberry Plantation. Eli Whitney was a family friend. Eli Whitney did go to Yale, but he wasn't an engineering student at Yale. In the plantation, Eli Whitney observes the cleaning of the cotton takes forever. It's all being done by hand because you have to make the cotton fibers relieved of any sort of impurities, seeds, insects, whatnot, so the fibers could be worked with. So back then, one person could clean 1 pound in 1 day. So it took 1 whole day to just clean 1 pound of cotton. Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin and the combing mechanism. Now all of a sudden, mechanically, one person can stand next to a cotton gin, 50 pounds of cotton in 1 day.
Wow.
1 pound, 1 day, 50 pounds, 1 day.
They're filming for a Disney movie here for Lady and the Tramp.
So the anniversary, we just had it last week. You don't have to have a PhD in statue symbolism to know that he died on horseback, right? Eyes are shut, head's down, swords down, 2 hooves are up. Notice his left hand is holding his right hip, but you can tell from his uniform he wasn't a sergeant, he was a commanding officer. The story of the Siege of Savannah is that it was an utter failure. The French warship messed everything up. The Brits were still at full strength. The siege needed to last almost another month or so. It only lasted a few hours. It was full retreat, and Washington never took Savannah. In fact, when the Revolutionary War was over in 1781, Savannah didn't surrender for another 6 months. Remember I said earlier that there was a lot of loyalists here, that Mulberry Plantation was abandoned? Yeah, there were a lot of loyalists here. So even though the surrender happened in 1781, Savannah didn't give up until 6 months later. But the Siege of Savannah is an interesting story. This monument went up in 1825. 2 things about it, though. Casimir Pulaski didn't die October 9th, and he didn't die on horseback. But by the time 1825 came, he was legend and very famous. So how did he become so famous during that period of time after his death? Well, his story goes back to Poland. He and his noble family and other nobles in Poland tried to overthrow the King of Poland. They didn't have the raw numbers to overthrow him. It actually went over a period of a full decade. So from age 18 to about age 28, he was in and out of skirmishes trying to overthrow his king because he believed in liberty and freedom, didn't believe in sovereigns governing by birthright. His last hurrah, he and some others tried to kidnap the King of Poland. They got caught, but he didn't actually get caught. He winds up in exile in Paris. Now, next part of the story is that we understand that he, through the Marquis de Lafayette, requested an audience with Benjamin Franklin because he believed in the freedom fight. Even though he doesn't have family in the New World, he believed in the cause of the colonists rebelling against King James. Comes over to the New World and presents himself to the Continental Congress, and they turn him down. His last hurrah was at Valley Forge, after meeting Washington a few times. He presents himself, and Washington gives in. Now, the reason that they weren't quite sure in those first few times was because the Continental Congress didn't have the greatest of luck with other European generals and fighters talking a big game and coming over here and not being able to produce on the battlefield. Well, this guy had 10 years of skirmishes, guerrilla warfare under his belt. He was the real deal. Washington's hesitation was, his belief was that horses were really meant to carry the heavy artillery, pull the wagons, and carry supplies. He wasn't convinced that horses in battle could be productive. Horse division, and every horse division goes back to him not taking no for an answer and convincing Washington that there was a function for horseback riding soldiers. On our side, to bombard one specific part of the British line, to weaken it, and horses can cross the battlefield quicker than foot soldiers, so the cavalry was to charge the field and cut a hole in the British line. Well, because the Brits were still at full strength, that bombardment didn't do the job it was supposed to do. It barely got off of our line and across the field when a cannonball exploded next to him on his right side. The story is his right side was riddled with shrapnel from the cannonball exploding. That's why he's holding his right hip. He was dehorsed. Maybe Henri Christophe or one of the Haitian boys pulled him off the battlefield. We don't know, but he was pulled off the battlefield alive. Because the battle was so short, he and some other officers were immediately put on a ship and were to go back to Charleston. This is where the story of Pulaski sort of takes a fork in the road. Some say he died while en route to Charleston and was buried at sea. Some say he made it to Charleston and he was buried at a plantation outside of Charleston. The story that sort of stayed, though, was that after midnight, so technically October 10th, the ship with the officers weighed anchor outside of Savannah, and a small party, rowed to land to Thunderbolt Island, and an officer was buried at Greenwich Plantation in the wee hours of October 10th. Then the ship went on to Charleston. We think that we have the manifest for the ship, and it doesn't show Pulaski ever really showing up at Charleston. That's why some say he was buried at sea. Savannah in 1825 went with the story that he was buried at Greenwich Plantation on Thunderbolt Island. So when this monument went up, they went out to Greenwich Plantation, they dug up what they thought were his remains, they assumed, and they interned him here next to his monument. If you look closely, that Italian marble's from 1825. That Italian marble's a lot newer. Over the subsequent decades and almost century plus, Savannah was getting a lot of grief for not actually having Pulaski. Charleston claimed him, people swore he was buried at sea, Chicago even claimed him, other people claimed him. So finally in 1996, the city had enough because now we've got DNA testing. They cracked open the crypt to do the DNA testing to prove they had Pulaski. The story is they didn't have to do any DNA testing because when they saw the remains, his right side was riddled with pockmarks in the bone that would be commensurate with shrapnel. When they did the DNA testing, it was all Eastern European blood. So now, on the anniversary, Poles of America wreaths come out, and the Polish citizens of Savannah celebrate the founder of the modern-day cavalry, Kazimierz Pulaski, a freedom fighter. His point to his soldiers were that you're all fighting for your personal freedom, for your family, for your lineage. This guy has no family in the New World. He was only fighting for freedom, the ideal, the principle. And that really touched Washington. He loved this guy. The spears as a testament to Tomachicci's relationship with the original settlers.
Decommissioned cannons. Cannonball. And that's the fire?
Yeah.
Pretty neat.
The north and south ends are still laid out a century and a half later, the same way Oglethorpe originally designed it. Remember I told you the way Oglethorpe originally designed the squares was that the north and south ends would have 5 cabins facing the square, an alleyway behind with their barn, and then 5 cabins facing away from the square. So 5 cabins facing in, 5 cabins facing out. So 5 lots facing in, 10 total. So count here in the corners. 1, 2, 3, 4. Gray with the white pillars makes 5. That's the front of the truss line. These lots are the exact same width that Oglethorpe originally laid out in paper in 1733. But here we are, 1855, and the lots are still the same width, but now they're brick and mortar townhomes. But that's the width of the original colonist's cabin. We're 150 years later, so what do you do if you've got a lot of money? The number on that house over there is 3. That family bought 3 lots and built one house. And then gray-yellow is 4 or 5.
Huh.
There's still 5 lots over there. Behind us, the house to its right, whose porch faces it, has 2 lots because they end right at the front of the truss line. There's still 5 lots over there.
Garden level's the half.
So this is the reason Savannah is so nice to walk around, because none of this stuff is out on the curb. You walk around Brooklyn and all this stuff is out on the street. It's all in the back area. Oglethorpe had no idea there'd be automobiles and, you know, recycling bins and everything, but it works out perfect, doesn't it? Carriage house burns, the main house doesn't, but your food always shows up lukewarm. But that's the price you pay for security. This is a great representation to give you a feel for what it probably looked like back in the early 1800s. These have been cleaned up and modernized with electricity and central air, but for the most part, they're still well patinaed, if you will.
Good, how are you?
All right. Y'all have a good day.
You too.
This is one of the last original trees in the historic district, going back to its square's origin. She has been here from the very beginning. Someday when she's not here, someone's going to look at this tree and say, man, there must have been a bad storm that blew it over. No, it had nothing to do with the storm. That tree, the only way it could get sunlight was to grow at an angle away from her. As old as that tree in the corner is, he's a lot younger than her because she is completely symmetrical, right? All of his branches are growing out the opposite direction. So when he was coming up, she was lower and wider, and the only way for that tree to get sun was to grow that way. And now look, I mean, in a lot of cities, that would be the oldest tree in town. But you can tell with her being completely symmetrical, she was here from the very, very beginning. This is the Catholic Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, proving that in the South, even the Catholics are Baptist. I'll be here all week. Crystals at dawn would occur, which is convenient because it's right next to the cemetery.
The dueling grounds.
Dueling was outlawed as a federal crime in the early 1800s, but Savannah sort of ignored it. So Savannah kept shooting at each other for another couple decades. Sanctuary city for defending your honor. If any bodies had warm clothing, the clothing was taken. If any of the bodies had any sort of personal effects or whatnot, jewelry would be stolen. The bodies and the caskets were burned, and these crypts were used as shelter for the Union soldiers out of the elements in the summer. See how that one's cracked in half? So none of these mausoleums have any bodies or caskets in them. The Union Army also was here for a period of time, and I guess kind of bored with the tip of their bayonet. There's a number of tombstones in there where 4s were changed to 9s, 7s were made into 9s, 6s would be made into 8s. In other words, if you do the math with some of those tombstones in there, some of these people apparently lived for 200 years. Well, they didn't. It's just the Union soldiers changed the dates. And this brick was laid here, this gullah brick, because this insignia represents water. And what can spirits do? They can't cross water. Now, the city actually has a mold. So if you notice, some of this brick is shiny and very new. That's the city replacing it with the mold they have. Anything that's completely worn down is going to be the 180, 90-year old brick. Well, the trustees in 1735 rewrote the trust document to specifically denote that it didn't just mean Anglo-Saxons. In 1735, slave ownership was outlawed in the colony of Georgia. Now, how did that come to pass? Because we all know this is Georgia after all. So what happened was, for a period of time, the debtors that were coming here were given 40 acres, a cabin to live in, and they were given 5 acres they could farm on their own. So a cabin, 5 acres they could do whatever they wanted with, and they were given 40 acres to farm for the company. Farming 40 acres with you and your immediate family was fairly reasonable. What wound up happening was, a few years into the colony, the trustees decided to offer non-debtors, just free British citizens, the opportunity to come to Georgia, and if you came here, you'd be given 500 acres. Farming 500 acres is a whole different enterprise than 40 acres. To make a long story short, one of the large landowners, a guy named Noble Jones Street's named after him, he actually was one of the first to come to the realization that he wasn't able to pay his taxes based on he and his immediate family farming his 500-acre plot. He was one of the first to go into South Carolina and bring back help, which at the point, in the beginning, he actually paid for it because he didn't want to violate the trust charter. But the floodgates had opened. The large landowners were falling behind on their taxes. Finally, in 1748, after almost a year and a half of arm twisting, the trustees finally relented and rewrote the trust document so that they could allow the larger landowners to have help on their plantations. and that's how everything else just evolved from there. But for the colony in 1748, it was too late. The colony was already way behind in its taxes. Finally, in 1752, King George repossessed Georgia. He took it back, which is ironic if you think about Oglethorpe establishing a colony to give people who were indentured servants a second chance on life and get free of their debts. He lost everything. He retired from Parliament in 1752, but he was held in good standing. He actually had some benefactors who really appreciated what he did in founding the colony of Georgia. So sort of just like Churchill, although when he left the prime ministership, he was basically broke. He had benefactors that helped pay for him to live in the family home. Oglethorpe had benefactors that allowed him to live out his days in relative comfort. But the king did take Georgia back over. But it is interesting to know its founding as a second chance debtor colony and it outlawing any sort of slave labor for its original founding. Had the trustees kept it to 40-acre plots, they may have been able to pay their taxes and everything would have been fine. It's sort of everything got squirrely when you started giving people 500 acres and then asking for taxes on 500 acres. Because everyone who takes the tour gets a complimentary bag of LED biscuits.
All right.
See how the shield should. Don't care about making any money on those. So, well, that was fun.
Yeah, that was.
Get this wrapped up. Yeah, that's basically sunrise at like 6:30. So one I just made black and white, the other one I kept. But yeah, so there's no cars on the street yet.
We're back from the Oliver Bentley's historic dog tour. What'd you guys think? Is that fun? You guys were a little bored because you're kids. Tina and I thought it was great. It was very relaxing. It was in the low 70s, which was awesome. We learned a whole lot about the history of Savannah. Maestro had a great time. And then we stopped in the Oliver Bentley store on East York Street next to Zunzi's. Picked up some treats. So thumbs up, definitely recommend it. Check it out if you're bringing... If you bring your dog to Savannah and you want to get to know the area, and check out, I'll drop their web address here. They do online orders and shipping of their treats. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.